Right, so guys, welcome to chapter two. So just so you know what we looked at in the previous three sessions, we've looked at the Plains Indians' belief and early government policy, migration and early settlement, and early conflict and tension. So again, be thinking about the key questions that are always going to be linked to these three things. And we're going to look today at development and settlement on the plains. One of the first significant things in this is the Civil War. You really need to know what causes it, what happens in it, but most importantly, what happens after it, a consequence of it, right? As a result of the Civil War, this happens, etc. So I'll briefly go through cause, and we'll get into the importance of it a little bit. Some keywords. So basically, the southern states, they break off. They set up their own confederacy because they're politically and ideologically opposed to the North. There'd been a long argument about slavery. The North wanted to stop its use. The southern states based their whole economy off slavery with these huge farms. Abraham Lincoln was the president, and fighting kicks off on the 12th of April, right? It's just a bit of context. So during it, you've got the Northern armies, 2 million, Confederates, 800,000 here, thereabout. A lot of people die during it. That's going to be important because then there's going to be people seeking to find their fortune somewhere else. And a lot of the land in the South was destroyed. So at least there's something called the Reconstruction to try and rebuild the South. But a lot of people will move west because the land in the South isn't, has been wrecked by the war. Also think about the use of troops during this war. You've got troops in the west who are being brought back to the east to fight. That's going to be important for a war that we look at later with the Indian Wars. And the war ends on the 9th of April in 1865. So Robert E. Lee, he meets Ulysses Grant and they surrender. Then the Reconstruction begins. But you need to know what impact the Civil War actually has. So slavery's ended. That's important because think about the Exoduster movement. Slavery ended. You get the Exodusters who are going to start moving west. A lot of people wanted to start and begin moving west because it was made easier by the government. There's two laws we're going to look at that are quite significant here, which are the Homestead Act, Pacific Railroad Act. Right. So any question, consequence, or importance of the Civil War, those two acts should definitely be two of your answers, 100%. You should know these two acts inside out by now. If you don't, that's a worry. The two of the most important ones in this topic. Not all soldiers wanted to return to civilian life. Many kind of stayed in the US armies, even taking lower ranks than before. Men in the fighting force in the wars are the Native Americans as well. But think of the impact. You've got Confederate soldiers who have lost, who turn to banditry and will move west and help lawlessness, when we look at people like the Reno Gang, etc. These are ex-soldiers who are trying to find a place in the world. So you've got that. You've got the two acts. You've got the Exodusters moving across. So Civil War has a huge impact. Right, so US now have got control. They want to encourage people to move west to expand their growing kind of country. They want to ensure they keep the territory they'd won, like Louisiana, who we don't really look at in this topic, but Louisiana used to be French. New Orleans, etc., and Mexico, and they wanted to fulfill this idea of manifest destiny. So note this down because I never see this used, and it really highlights why the Homestead Act was important. Okay, initially, right before the Homestead Act, the government offered parcels of 640 acres of land for sale at $1 an acre. So mathematicians amongst you will figure out that's $640. Not a lot of people have that money. So it wasn't very effective initially. Only the rich were able to buy up the land and then sell it even at a higher price. So it wasn't really working the way the government wanted. So this is when they passed the Homestead Act and the Timber Culture Act, which we... Right, now you have the Homestead Act. Sorry, I had to shrink my screen there because it's covering all the content. So the Homestead Act, you really need to know this inside out. Importantly, 160 acres of was parceled out to the homesteaders, right? It's far more affordable. To get the Mark C, you need to compare it to the previous offer by the government. And it's $10 to register a claim. Far easier to register a claim than buying $640 worth of land. Anyone could file a claim as long as they were head of a family or single and over 21. Ex-slaves, women, or Plains Indians could not file a claim. If you filed a claim, you had to live and work on the land. That was the point of it. That was to stop these big businesses buying it all up. Once you'd lived there for 5 years and built a house and planted 5 acres of crops, you could pay $30 to buy the homestead outright. This was proving up. And these are where the real stats are. By 1876, over 6 million acres had become homesteads. It settled the Great Plains for the first time, and eventually 80 million acres was settled as a direct consequence. The biggest success was Nebraska, which became a state with over 120,000 immigrants coming in to take up a homestead. Only 13 million acres had been proved up by 1884. Only 80 million acres out of a total of 500 million acres was homesteaded, 16%. So this is showing, green showing how it's positive, red saying not so great. So think about those statistics. Homesteads were formed by people buying land off railroad companies, then proven up with the Homestead Act. So again, we'll get into the Pacific Railroad Act, but not many actually used this one. 60% of homesteads never proved up because of the difficulties farming. Big ranchers would also force employees to make a claim, then hand over their rights. And the act allowed people to buy the claim for $1.25 per acre once they plowed 1 acre and lived there 6 months. As a consequence, people filed claims to sell it for profit, meaning many families had paid someone for it rather than prove up under the act, right? So that's everything on the Homestead Act. You need to be taking the points here, because the question is always going to be about importance linked to settlement, development, migration, and it certainly does give an opportunity, but you've got enough evidence there to show and balance it and show it wasn't all great. It was very good, but it wasn't all great. So the Timber Culture Act is very similar to the Homestead Act. It's just an extra kind of bump up for it. Don't worry if you're like, oh, I don't know what that is. It's quite simple to follow. It's literally just the Homestead Act with planting trees, basically. So it allows homesteaders to claim a further 160 acres if they planted trees on a quarter of it. And trees were important because they acted as a windbreak, which helped shelter crops. Plus, they provide resources for buildings and equipment and fuel. And it was to reduce the high rate of failed homesteads. 16 million acres had been claimed by 1878. Again, good statistic to show why it was important for things like settlement. But people exploited loopholes to claim land they had no intention of settling, and after a few years, when land prices rose, they would sell on the land for profit. So that's everything you need to know on the Timber Culture Act. Again, pause it, take notes from it, but very important, don't say you don't know it. Then we're going to have a look at a little bit more movement west. So the final part of the government's actions was to encourage migration, was to facilitate kind of this movement because of the railroads. And one of the big problems of the Civil War was the South wanted the railroad that was going through their key territories, whereas the North wanted it from theirs. So this is why the Civil War is quite important, because the Civil War means the North can then push through these acts without any resistance from the South, and it means they can start building the railroad where they want to build it. But why? Brings law and order, right? Quick communication allows you. Remember the problem with law and order? One man and his horse trotting around the country. This allows for quick transportation, allows the US to connect to the West. And they're able to trade as well. This is going to help boom the economy. And Manifest Destiny, of course. Pretty much every question in this can link to Manifest Destiny, so you should know it. So what does it do? Well, it sets up 2 companies, the Union Pacific Railroads Company. They went westwards across the plains from Nebraska. And so basically 2 of them from either side meeting each other. So the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific. Okay. And this was encourage them to build the roads. The government gave them free land to build. The companies could then use this land to sell to settlers to raise more money. So again, the companies who could go bankrupt from this, because it was a huge challenge, they got land all along the railroad that they were selling off to settlers. This is great for improving settlement, migration, development, all these big questions. It links into this. And, it's even more effective than the Homestead Act, because people are like, where would I rather build my homestead? In the middle of nowhere or next to the train? You want to, it's about access, isn't it? So Pacific Railroad Act, not just for quick migration, for settlement, what's building up. So, like before, here are the key points. Again, pause this and read through it, because I've made sure I've got every bit of information I can on here. So in 1862, the railroad network in the north was extensive, but only reached the Missouri River, and the government wanted to route to Omaha. So there's a lot of railroads everywhere. They're just not going across the country. And they want to reach Oregon, they want to reach California. So the two railroad companies, as I said before, the Union Pacific, the Central Pacific, they were built up towards each other. The act committed the government to extinguishing any rights the Plains Indians had to the land along the route. And they loaned each company $16,000 for every mile of track, $48,000 in the mountains. Note that down. That's a really big incentive for these companies to do it, right? To get these loans, to be able to do it. The companies were granted the land along, as we said before, to sell off to settlers. And the first transcontinental, that's across the continent, was set up to run alongside the tracks, the telegraph, communication. Great for law and order, because you're allowed to speak to your partners across the country. And the government gave the companies 45 million acres of land and loaned over 61 million, but both companies nearly went bust due to the problems with building it. It was so big, and it was so expensive. The companies used marketing to encourage settlers to buy the land. They laid on special shows and attractions, again, very important, to be like, go take up this land, go and settle, answers all the questions you need for encouraging people to go and, build homesteads next to the tracks. And the companies had a Bureau of Immigration. This was used to basically persuade people from foreign countries to come settle the land. 10,000 settled in Nebraska and 60,000 Germans in Kansas. By 1880, the railroad company had settled 200 million acres in the West, more influential than the Homestead Act in encouraging settlement, because they had more land and better marketing. So think about those key points. Okay, just a graphic to show you the railroad. So you see the green little squiggly lines, that's the railroad in the east, and then they want to build it across, which they start doing. And you can see Omaha, Sacramento. So what impact does it have? Well, it prevents movement and hunting of the Indians, because Indians are trying to hunt the buffalo, and then a big train comes. It brought goods to homesteaders and ranchers, which led to expansion of settlements. So the new technology is reaching them. The plains are so hard to farm, and the trains will bring in, things like the sulky plow, the wind pumps, etc. So if you've got a question on farming, the trains are great for, connecting the farmers to the east and bringing in the new technology. Fencing off land prevented the movement of the Plains Indians. Indians' attitudes turned hostile towards settlers, and buffalo hunting became a sport. Quite often, people would be on the train shooting the buffalo from the train, and buffalo were just going to be left everywhere. So, has a very negative impact on the Indians. And think about this question: how it could link to way of life of the Plains Indians, and how much of an impact that is. Impact on the railroads, well, made traveling west cheaper, easier. Encouraged immigration from Europe. Again, Europeans were like, yeah, let's go to America, you can easily get about. Towns grew rapidly. No one ever puts this. And, think of Abilene. Like, these cow towns are going to be built next to the train tracks as they transport their cows. So towns start popping up. But also, when you get a few homesteaders buying land, they're building next to each other, and then, they form a community. Farmers, again, transporting grain, so farmers are getting richer. Settlers could buy products from industrial cities, connected these different territories. It was a belief that this was the final part of Manifest Destiny. There was a huge boom in the economy because America could start trading with China. And again, as I said before, the cattle industry just went off the charts. So everything you need to know on the impact of the railroads, make sure you know it. Now, there were problems of law and order. So these new towns next to the railway, they led to lawlessness, right? People were raj, basically kicking off all the time, and they were very hard to handle. And they were known as the hell on wheels, these towns, because they were rough and ready, mainly cowboys who had been doing the long drive, come to the town and just wanted to kick back, fight, and all that. So the causes, well, weapons. It's kind of similar with the law and order. It gets a bit repetitive, but you need to know it. So weapons, you've got to arm yourself to fight back. The code of the West, this idea of you being responsible for yourself, culture of violence. It's still massive. Political factors as well. Remember, the cattle barons are in control of most things. Social factors, there's a lot of racism. And economical factors as well. There's going to be real clashes between the ranchers and the homesteaders. We see this in the Johnson County War, and we see it with miners and things like that. So again, take time to read all these, but basically covers everything of what's causing the lawlessness. Apologies, my head's blocking the political factors, but that is just showing how the mining towns and a lot of the law courts are run by the rich and powerful ranchers. They were able to control it, manipulate the law to their own advantage. Okay, so how was the Wild West kind of portrayed? Well, these dime novels appeared in the 1860s. They were successful. They were based on the lives of real people. The stories were wildly exaggerated, and the novels helped create this myth of the frontier hero. They were very popular to create the myth of the West, and people kind of wanted to go west because of them. You got things like the Virginian. The Virginian, published in 1902, sold 50,000 copies. It's a little bit after what we need the Virginian, to be honest. So you can read through that, but it's not as important. You got Buffalo Bill, the idea of hunting the bill, these plays to kind of highlight the wildness of the West. So just be aware, it's not as important this bit, but there was a myth surrounding the West. And then you got problems, law and order. So you got new towns. New towns became hell on wheels, which were the most lawless cow towns. Abilene's population went from 500 to 7,000. Think about this, guys. Same as when we're looking at problems of the West. When you get new territories just booming in population, it leads to lawlessness. And it's the same with these towns. Cowboys would have gunfights, murders were common. Jails were constructed where cowboys tore it down. Abilene tried to ban guns, but the cowboys shot the sign full of holes. In 1870, Thomas Smith was hired. He was a marshal. He banned guns. He was a good boxer, so he went around fighting people, just knocking people out who went against him. However, then he got an axe in the head. You get Wild Bill Hickok, who was hired in 1871. The cowboys feared him, but he didn't really enforce the law. He just went around gambling, so the town sacked him and decided the only way to stop lawlessness was to try and stop cowboys coming to town. So think about those problems. Tell them as stories. They're all little stories, these. And the impact of the Civil War, you've got, there's significantly the potential for trouble in the West because of the army deserters. We said that before. The impact of the Civil War can answer so many questions. And the arrival of these large number of ex-soldiers in the West after the war. Gangs of outlaws were often made of former soldiers. Many of these men were traumatized by the war and were just unable to find work in peacetime. Outlaws who were former Confederate soldiers might also be kind of resentful towards the victorious US government. And many places in the West, law enforcement was still too weak to control these gangs. You got a famous one like the Reno Gang. The Reno Gang were these deserters who terrorized communities, bribed local officials to avoid arrest. They robbed trains, took $16,000 from one. The Pinkertons, who were these agency, were hired to kind of hunt them down and try and bring them to justice. But the gang struck again in 67 and 68. And then another train robbery netted them 96,000. One was captured though and gave up the rest. And Vigilante Committee, remember these themes always interconnect. They were set up and ended up lynching them. Great example. Right, okay, that was a good run through. We'll leave it there. So remember, hopefully you find this useful. Think about the big questions throughout this topic.